12 million poor households are set to get 8,000 naira monthly for 6 months. That's 48,000 naira in 6 months. It's part of the Tinubu administration's measures to cushion the effect of subsidy removal. But the question on the mind of many Nigerians is, what criteria will the government use to determine vulnerable households? Our rights correspondent, Georgina Ndokwe Ezeinka, examines how achievable this plan is.
Following the National Assembly's approval of $800 million loan request by President Bola Tinubu, over 62 million Nigerians in over 15 million poor households captured in the National Social Safety Net database stand to benefit from the 8,000 naira palliative. This amount will be shared equally among both male and female heads of households. According to latest data from the National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office, among the states that will receive the highest distribution includes Kano with over 1.3 million households and Kebbi with 1 million households captured. The states with the lowest number of households captured are in the southern part of the country. Ekiti with 152,538 households is the state with the lowest number. Enugu follows with 153,587 households, and Bayelsa State with 159,295 households. Now, with about 133 million Nigerians in multidimensional poverty, how realistic is it for a poor household to live on 8,000 naira a month? Data shows that 83% of the country's population do not have bank accounts, compared to 17%. So the possibility of sending the fund digitally to the beneficiaries is almost impossible. 75% of these individuals have no valid means of identification. Another issue of concern is what happens to these families after the 6 months elapses. Data from the National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office indicates that 31% of heads of these households are unemployed, while 41% engage in agriculture. 58.1% of them have no educational background, while 16.6% have secondary school certificate as their highest level of education. Some experts have also suggested that this money should have been used to build the agricultural sector, attain energy security, and provide a conducive atmosphere for small businesses to grow. Well, in the coming days, Nigerians will be expecting to hear from the Tinubu administration on how soon this distribution will commence. Georgina Ndukwezaika, Arise News.
Right, we're joined now by Apera. Apera, that's the name. Country Director of Family Health International 360. The former National Coordinator, National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office, and the Office of the Vice President, and in our offsite studio, Victor Opatola, a fellow at the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Thank you, both of you, for joining us on News 99. Let me start with you, Apera. Look, the question is, do Nigerians really need palliatives or intervention schemes and programs that can sustainably solve the poverty problem? Is it palliatives we need now, and how far can it go?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here on the studio. I think in every crisis situation, either man-made or natural shocks, there are the first response. And in most cases, all countries over the world, we use cash transfer to cushion the effect and impact of that crisis, economic crisis, but also stimulate economic growth. The immediate example is in the US and other countries of the world when COVID-19 happened. Developed countries of the world, including Nigeria, developed cash transfer to serve as an immediate cushion to those who were affected or impacted by that economic shock, and also stimulate economic growth. So yes, it's a step in the right direction to do that because you're injecting cash transfer to 12 million people. When you do the math, that's a huge amount of money and that will go into the economy. Now, it will do two things. One, it will smoothen consumption to those who will benefit from this cash transfer. Evidence show that 70% of the monies that you give to the poor and vulnerable through cash transfer are used for basic necessities like food. So now if you use 70% of this cash transfer to buy food, just think about the multiplier effect. This is going to raise demand. And our elementary economics will tell us that once demand is raised or it's high, supply we need to meet. And when you mount pressure on supply, you're also mounting pressure on production. If you mount pressure on production, manufacturing comes in, employment, because the companies will need to employ more people to meet the demand for their products. And they will have more sales, and so they will need to pay more tax on the tax revenue of government will also increase. So there's a multiplier effect around the cash transfer. So not only does this smoothen consumption and support poor families to put food on the table, it also stimulates economic growth.
Okay, Yowa, thank you very much for your insights tonight. Victor from our offsite studio. If you can hear me, let me take you back to the budget. 70 billion naira for 460 lawmakers. That's just for the running personal effects sort of. Let's compare that with 8,000 per month for 12 million households. That's 48,000 naira in 6 months per household. Something seems to have gone wrong with that arithmetic. Where's our priority anyway?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I've always mentioned the fact that if government wants to address the issue of the effect of subsidy removal, it ought to do it holistically through comprehensive policy work. Now, the National Assembly, their responsibility and duty in this sense ought not to be approval of the money alone. The National Assembly ought to pass a law, an act, which will afford a comprehensive details of the money that is meant to be spent, how it should be spent, the criteria with which the individuals that will benefit from this amount. Now, and apart from that, the figures that is the amount ought to be based on economic research. It ought not to be a figure pulled out of the air. Now, when we look at other countries who, for instance, the United States of America used the CARE Act during the COVID, the amount that the government, American government, disbursed to the citizens of America was not an amount that was picked off in the air. It was an amount that was reached economically, because the purpose of this money that will be disbursed to millions of Nigerians is just not to just give them money for the purpose of giving them money. Is to cushion economic effect. Now, looking at this amount, 8,000 naira, when you look at it, you begin to question the extent of the economic impact of subsidy that 8,000 naira per month per family can actually cushion in the long run. So basically, the duty of the burden on the National Assembly is not to do this piecemeal, is to make an act, a comprehensive act that will detail the individuals, the criteria through which individuals will get this amount, the broader policy work that the fuel subsidy removal ought to impact. When I say broader policy work, I mean, for instance, one of those things that ought to be considered here is in regards to policy work in terms of transportation. So this money we are talking about, the cushioning the effect of subsidy removal ought not to be by way of cash transfer alone. And apart from that, the amount with which will be disbursed to individuals, the criteria with which the amount was reached, the criteria with which individuals that will benefit from this amount was reached, the criteria of the spread, the amount of individuals that will benefit from it in each state is still shrouded in secrecy. Now is where the National Assembly ought to come in by enacting a broader and more rigorous law that will detail how this fund should be spent and how these individuals should be assessed. So in this, comparing it with the amount that you just mentioned in regards to the amount paid to the National Assembly members, you can see that the amount that will be paid to individuals is paltry compared to that of the National Assembly. And when this subsidy removal was kickstarted, we mentioned the fact that it ought to have started from the higher echelon of the society. So those that ought to bear the brunt ought to start from the National Assembly, from the officials, from the government officials, as the case may be, through slashing of their salary.
Okay.
So you can't tell individuals, you can't tell citizens to bear the brunt of subsidy removal where the public officials who ought to bear it to begin with are not bearing it.
Okay. Okay, so Yowa, let me come back to you. Still on breakdown, I mean, let's put the figures to it. 35 billion naira will be going for the National Judicial Commission. FCTA will get 10 billion naira and 70 billion naira earmarked for the National Assembly infrastructure. Now, I mean, you are saying that it's a good idea. Yeah, some believe so, but others are saying, look, can this monies go into, you know, building infrastructure, coming up with interventions that can have a sustainable solution to the, you know, to the poverty problem, instead of borrowing or approving these funds for consumption? What happens when the funds are, you know, depleted? What happens? Do we go back to the National Assembly, you know, for another approval? What exactly will happen?
Okay, so I would assume that government has thought this through. For every crisis, economic crisis, you have a 2 to 3 stage approach. The immediate, and in this case, for any economic shock, will be a cash transfer to the most adversely affected, which is the poor and vulnerable. Then government ought to think of other measures that would include and not exclude to grants to small-scale industries, education grants to those who might not be able to afford it, agricultural grants, electrical tariffs to those who will not affect and not get to it. And when you then use the instrument of the cash transfer to unlock the economy like we described earlier, and you free up the space and you increase perhaps maybe taxes or revenue, then you invest in other areas. So government needs to come up with a clear plan of reinvesting the savings from the oil, removal of the oil subsidy, but the revenues that might probably accrue from the returns on the cash transfer. So government needs to be clear that, okay, I've removed oil subsidy, I've saved this much amount of money. I am going to take this money now and invest in roads, I'm investing in electricity, I'm investing in industries, I'm investing in small grants or loans to manufacturing firms to better the economy, to increase, reduce unemployment. So government needs to be very clear around that. Then the cash transfer will come in handy.
Dr. Apera, before we bring in other guests, I mean, you were part of the National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office, am I correct?
Yes.
Yes, you were. Are you able to, you know, looking back, say, look, in terms of impact, that this was the impact that this, you know, cash transfers in the past actually made, in a way that will say, look, it's worthy, it's worth going into again?
Yes, it was. I will tell you
How
very
successful
clearly.
was it?
How successful was it? If you go to the report, the scorecard of the CSOs that did monitor, the civil society organization that did monitor the cash transfer program and produced their report, 98.9% of the cash transfer beneficiaries got their cash and also put it to use. And then there are lots of success stories of individuals. I mean, you only recall last year, I think in Kwara State, women saved money from the cash transfer that they were collecting and opened up a primary school or built a primary school block and started sending their children to school there, where the state government picked up. You also recall on the news the story of the women who contributed money and bought a car to be used as ambulance to move pregnant women in their village or community to the nearest hospital for birth. So there have been a lot of success stories around that. I think what government needs to do is perhaps do an evaluation of that program and publish the results of the impact of that program.
Okay,
but,
now that's good to know. Let's get back to Victor from our offsite studio. Victor, perhaps this is the best time, if you ask me, to address the issue of multidimensional poverty, education, health, potable water, and of course, infrastructure. Now, speak to us about how the government, the federal government, can engage state governors and of course the local government administration as well to properly address multidimensional poverty at the grassroots rather than just doling out 8,000 per month.
Thank you. Earlier on, I mentioned the fact that in order to address the many issues arising out of this fuel subsidy removal, the federal government should look at this from holistic policy perspective. And the National Assembly should enact a law which will have a more broad implication. One of the ways in which the federal government can go about this is to ensure that it coordinates itself alongside with the effort of the state government and local government in regards to what it is that they have been doing earlier on. Another area in which the government should do, like my fellow guest in the studio mentioned, is to make an analysis of the previous social safety programs that has been used by the previous government, to make an analysis to adjudge the errors and the gains of that particular policy program. And most importantly, if this program is policy driven, it will be more elaborate. It will not be only specific on certain areas. It will also ensure that other areas are also developed, for instance, the public transportation areas. This can impact that area and ensure that it is developed and not focus on one particular area of the government.
All right, it's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much, both of you gentlemen. Iowa Apera, thank you for joining us. And Victor Opatola also joining us on Newsnight tonight.